Game 2 of the World Chess Championship. Of course, first game was drawn. Ding had a little bit of a rough ride, but Nepo couldn't make anything of it. So first game drawn. Here's game 2. Solid start from Nepo, playing very classically with a pawn in the middle of the board. So no fianchetto, none of his Grunfeld systems, for example. Now, normal moves here, of course, knight c3, or Ding is a specialist actually with the Catalan. But today he played this extraordinary move, pawn to h3. If one of my students had played this move, I'd be saying, what are you doing? You've got to bring your pieces out. It's almost as though you're passing and you're saying to your opponent, okay, you play something and I'll react to it. I think from Nepo's point of view is that it drags him straight out of his preparation. I mean, this is an incredibly rare move for good reason. But Nepo has to think with black, how exactly does this change the situation in all those variations? You know, should you be playing with bishop b4 check? Should you play with bishop e7? Does white really want to play g4? Or is this just a passing move? Let me just show you one line where it can have an effect. For example, if black plays in a very unpretentious way, just playing bishop e7 and castles, white can take, play an exchange variation and put the bishop on f4. h3 is a useful move because it means the bishop can always retreat back to h2. And later on, you can actually play for g4. Not so silly. So there are systems where actually h3 fits. Now, after around about 9 minutes thought, Nepomniachtchi decided to take on c4. And now we've basically got a Queen's Gambit accepted where white has this pawn move h3. But funnily enough, this actually reaches a known position. So here's the point. Black has exchanged here and wants to get in b5, gain some ground on the queen side. Castles, knight c6. I mean, these are very standard moves, of course. But with the inclusion of h3, it looks a bit strange. Bishop e7. Now, it's important for white to break down these pawns. So that's why a4 is played. So it means, well, if this is taken, then of course, you know, the knight can gain a good position. We'll probably take on c5 first. So b4 is pretty normal. And now knight e4. Okay, these are all pretty normal moves. And now knight a5. So opens up the bishop's diagonal. So you can see the knight is now threatened. And the knight actually covers some important squares here. Now here is where Ding had quite a think. The funny thing is, before I go into the different options here, this position can actually be reached via a different move order, but with the pawn on h2. Let me just compare and contrast. So this is actually a known position, but with the pawn on h2. So here's how it can be reached. So knight c3, c5. So this is a normal semi-Tarrasch position. a3. Black takes here and plays a6. Of course, it's very similar to Queen's Gambit, accepted lines. And now, the best move for white is actually to play a4. You can see we've reached exactly the same position, except the pawn is on h2, and this is a known position. So it's extraordinary how they've actually managed to reach something normal, except the pawn is on h3. Does this have any significance? Well, it can do in endgames. It could be that white has gained a tempo because the king has a flight square. It also has some significance in other kinds of positions, as we're about to see. Now, I suppose the obvious move for white here, given the knight is attacked, is to take on c5. So why didn't Ding play this. I mean, I think this is a very safe continuation for white. But I suspect that Nepo knew this position with pawn on h2. I mean, he said as much in the press conference actually after the game. Here, black has a couple of safe continuations. There's bishop e4. There's also knight d7. And this should actually be okay for black. And black's pieces are very active on the queen side. But white risks nothing in this line. But instead, Ding played, with hindsight, quite a risky move. Now, he was only anticipating queen takes f6, and then some exciting things can happen with e4 and so on. You know, white has a lead in development because the king is already castled. But quite quickly, after about 2.5 minutes, Nepo recaptured with the g-pawn. And this came as a total surprise to Ding. So why has Nepo inflicted this, such damage to his pawn structure? Well, you can see with the lines I've drawn on the board, the g-file is open, the bishop and the rook cross lines on that pawn on g2. And with the pawn on h3, it actually makes it more difficult to block the g-file with g3, because with the pawn on h2, it would be supporting that pawn. With the pawn on h3, it's not so clear. I think it's interesting that Nepo's instinct was very sharp here. You know, very quickly he appreciated that he was going to get some attacking chances. I mean, to my eyes in this position, it's not at all obvious, because black's king is still in the middle. Ding understandably played e4. You know, if he can break open the position, then the king could be rather insecure. But watch how Nepo deals with this. c4, knocking the bishop back, and that to some extent keeps the central position closed actually. Now, it's important that Nepo does something about his king. So he played queen c7, clearly preparing to castle queenside. And yeah, it's not so easy for white, this position actually. Bishop d2 played. Rook g8, there we go, this important move, lining up against the king. And rook c1. So it feels as though this pawn could be a little bit sensitive. So understandably, Ding puts the rook on c1 opposite the queen. But that didn't faze Nepo at all, and he just castled queenside. So now the king and queen are lined up, and with the rook on c1, you've got to think, wow, that looks risky. But Nepo had it under control. I mean, it's quite possible in this position, well, this is already actually quite difficult for white. It's just so much easier for black to play. So the computer wants to play king h1 straight away. The king nudges here. But black has interesting options here. You know, maybe bishop d6 and potentially doubling on the g-file. You can also play for f5 sometimes. But Ding, after about 15 minutes, went for bishop d3, so a sharp move. Now obviously that can't be taken, there's a pin. Black would lose the queen. King b8, very natural to step out of the rook's line. But it's not clear how white follows up in this position. Very difficult. This pawn is protected. One would like to play queen e2 here to connect the rooks and obviously potentially take here, but the tactics just don't work because black can take. Rook takes, it's no longer check, and then of course you take the queen and black wins material. This is the problem. One could try to take here, but this just isn't working. For example, queen e2, okay, there's the pin here, but watch what happens. Rook c8 guards this, b3, you can take here. just doesn't matter. There's going to be a check after rook takes queen. You take with check, that's the key thing, and rook takes c7. And black with rook and two bishops against the queen, and still potentially some play on the g-file. I mean, this is a winning position for black. So Ding had thought up actually a defensive strategy. He played rook e1. He followed bishop d3 with rook e1 very quickly. Clearly his idea is to put the bishop back on f1 to guard g2. Now you can see what I mean. Let me put the rook back on f1. Ding would very much like to play g3 in this position, but you can see how vulnerable that pawn is when the pawn stands on h3 and not h2. You know, already black can consider taking on g3. It wouldn't surprise me if that's actually a winning continuation, but if rook takes g3 immediately doesn't work, then something like bishop d6 and taking here. I mean, this is too weak, and it also weakens the knight and along the diagonal. This is white's problem. So that's why Ding played rook e1 in order to bring that bishop back to f1 to cover g2. Well, that seems like a very reasonable idea, well motivated. The problem is this. f5. This completely cuts across white's strategy. Clearly, with pressure on e4, the bishop cannot retreat to f1. So the big question is, well, why can't this pawn just be taken? Remember, if bishop takes knight, just queen takes, seems that everything is okay. Here is the problem. Here is the move that Ding had overlooked. Rook takes d4. Now this didn't happen. I should repeat. E takes f5 didn't happen, but this is why it didn't happen. Rook takes d4 completely destroys white's defenses. You can see there's pressure here on the d file. If the bishop retreats, well, it wouldn't surprise me if a simple move like this is actually going to win, actually. Just bishop takes, and well, obviously there's a pin there, and if queen takes, then rook takes, and yeah, black is a piece up in that position. And, well, okay, the big question, why not knight takes d4? Well, this is actually forced mate. Rook takes g2. There we go. We can see the connection with the rook and the bishop meeting on g2. King h1, queen h2 is mate, king f1, and this is forced checkmate. I mean, it is actually just brutal. There is no way back for white here. King e3, bishop h6 is mate. Absolutely decisive. So after f5, this is the problem. You can't retreat the bishop to f1 because e4 is hanging. You can't take here because rook takes d4 is decisive. I mean, it really is that bad for white. So how does white play this position? It is just incredibly difficult. If king h1, I mean, I think there are various ways for black to play this, but a simple way looks like f6, which clears the second rank for the queen to switch over to the g-file. It is tough work for white. It's a very difficult position. Ding played bishop c2. To add to his woes, he was down on time as well. He was struggling on the clock. I mean, the position is his main problem here. And at this point, Nepomniachtchi was really in his element. You know, he played these attacking moves very swiftly, very fluently. After just 3 minutes, he played knight c6. He played so instinctively, played so well. And this is a problem. This pawn on d4 is attacked. And again, yeah, that would open up the d-file for the rook. It's very difficult for white. Ding went with bishop g5, trying to fight back. But again, rapidly, Nepo didn't take too long over this decision. He sacrificed the exchange, and it's it's excellent. And took on d4. Ding, I suppose, could be somewhat relieved that the g-file isn't so much of a problem, but black is simply breaking through the middle. And I mean, black's pieces are superbly placed here. Of course, there are going to be threats on the d-file with the discovered attack on the queen, which is why queen h5 was played. f6 again played fairly quickly. So the knight attacked, which went back to f3. Ding wants to get rid of that knight on d4. An exchange on c2. Actually very simple chess. He's recovered another pawn, and, well, importantly, that e-pawn has disappeared, and these bishops are just so strong now. Rook attacked, rook d2. Both players sort of playing quite quickly here. Nepo full of confidence. Ding, because he was actually very short of time. He was down to just a couple of minutes for 15 moves to get to the time control. But, I mean, in a way, time shortage wasn't the problem. He just doesn't have a position here. Threat is to take on f3, and then to play bishop h2 check, winning the rook on d2. So that's why king h1 was played, to avoid that tactic. And now this queenside pawn majority can just be pushed through. There are no checks on the b file. This is the problem. So actually black's king is safe. Even if it had to move, it's safe on a8, covered by that bishop. Rook d4 played. c2, threatening to queen. Queen h6 stops the pawn queening, but now a very clean winning move. e5. Problem is, this rook simply doesn't have a good square to go to. You can see all these squares are covered, and if the rook retreats to d2, then c1, and black makes a queen, and that's the end of the show. So absolutely dominant final position for Nepo here. Ding Liren resigned. So Nepo scores the first win. This was a curious game. I have to say, I really liked this move h3 because it's fresh. You know, it's great to see a World Championship match, a game in the World Championship, where the players aren't afraid to play something that's really quite off the wall and actually reached a very interesting position. But here, knight takes f6 was clearly a terrible misjudgment. As Ding said, it came as a total surprise, which is surprising in itself. And after Nepo got the king to safety on the queen side, and in fact it was safe, even though there's not much pawn cover, really this attack down the g-file is very unpleasant. After the game, Ding said about h3, he said it's a move that's very rare. I know a lot of ideas after h3, but today's game was a disaster. The idea was a good invention from my seconds. I just didn't play very well. Yeah, poor guy. I feel very sorry for him. But for Nepo, this was an excellent game. And I think we really saw in this game his strengths as a player. He's so dangerous when he has the initiative. He's so dangerous when he has the attack. Tomorrow is a rest day in the World Championship. Let's see if Ding, I hope, can recover. And, I'll see you for the next game, Game 3, on Wednesday. Thanks for watching.